let's dive into our text, Romans 15. And I'll back up to 20 and I'll catch 2 verses and then we'll get into our new text. Paul says in verse 20, "And thus I aspired to preach the gospel not where Christ was already named, so that I would not build on another man's foundation, but, as it is written, they who had no news of him shall see, and they who have not heard shall understand." Verse 22. "For this reason I have often been prevented from coming to you. But now, with no further place for me in these regions, and since I have had for many years a longing to come to you whenever I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in passing, and to be helped on my way there by you, when I have first enjoyed your company for a while." Verse 25. "But now I am going to Jerusalem, serving the saints. For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. Yes, they were pleased to do so, and they are indebted to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in their spiritual things, they are indebted to minister to them also in material things. Therefore, when I have finished this and have put my seal on this fruit of theirs, I will go on by way of you to Spain. I know that when I come to you, I will come in the fullness of the blessing of Christ." Hey, let me share something about myself that none of you probably know. I am very, very passionate about hockey. Hockey is extremely significant to me. How many of you have seen evidence of that? Raise your hands. Okay, if you were going to look for evidence of that, where might you look? I propose you might look at my iCal. You might look at my calendar and see, how many hockey games have you been to in the last few years? Maybe you would look at my bank accounts. Maybe you'd look at Great Western. You'd look at my Chase statement. You might look at PayPal. How much money have I spent on hockey tickets? Hockey swag? Hockey art? Hockey equipment? You see, if you were to investigate my iCal and my PayPal, you would probably find it hard to believe that hockey is very significant to me. I want to preach on this subject, iCal and PayPal. Our call to generous living from the fullness of Christ. Paul was a missionary called by God to go to the nations. That word ethnos, Gentiles, the nations. And by the way, if you missed last Sunday's sermon, would you go back and listen to it? It's on our website. Eric Odegaard preached on the life of a missionary. But in verse 22, Paul says, "For this reason, I have often been prevented from coming to you." So Paul says, hey, Romans, I've wanted to come to you for a long time, but I've been prevented because there were people who had never heard. Here in the regions between Jerusalem and Illyricum. And so then, but back in chapter 1, he said, "I long to see you," Romans. He said in verse 13 of chapter 1, "Brethren, often I've planned to come to you, but I've been prevented." And so Paul had some kind of a holy ambition that at times would overpower what he longed to do. Do you see that? Write this down. Our call to generous living should be causal, not casual. See, it matters where you place the "you" in that English word, right? Causal, not casual. Anybody in here already putting up deer stands? Yeah, I see that hand in the back. If you ask any bow hunter about his arrows, for example, you ask Jeff Boggs, Jeff, what length arrow do you shoot? I can guarantee you he's not going to say, oh, it doesn't matter. You ask Phil Rich, what weight arrow do you shoot? What kind of broadhead do you shoot? I can guarantee you he's not going to say, oh, it really doesn't matter. Why? Because it does matter. And so these things that are important to these guys cause them to pay attention to these things. How long is my arrow? What kind of broadhead? If you are casual about your new truck, it won't matter where you park at the Little League game. But if you're causal about your new truck, my friend Brian Smith, back at one of John's games, we were playing away, and I saw him drive in, and he parked way out, and he walked up to the field. I knew exactly what he was doing. He's causal. He doesn't want a foul ball in his new truck, right? We are not casual about the things that matter to us. The things that matter to us are causal. In other words, they evoke causation. They elicit. They incite. They prompt us to move or to not move. Here's a life question. When is the last time you were hindered from investing your time or your money in a personal longing because of some kingdom ambition? Let's be honest. Going to Rome to visit Christians was not a bad thing. I mean, it's often not a sinful thing or a bad thing that God asks us to postpone or to say no to. Now, I'm not saying it's a sin to buy new things or to go on trips. But what would happen if the Great Commission, the call to make disciples of all the nations, became a holy ambition that we were willing to be hindered at times? For example, here's one that hits home to me. Would I suspend deer season? Brother Tom, this is one that hits me. Would I suspend deer season to invest in reaching lost people? Or maybe this one will hit you. Have you ever been hindered from buying a new driver? Golf people. Or a new outfit because of this call to kingdom work? Now listen, I'm not trying to heap false guilt on anybody. My family has a camping trip planned for 2 weeks. We were looking forward to it. We're desperate for it. So I'm not sitting here saying we're going to cancel our vacation. But I think we ought to ask, would we be willing to? Would we be willing to? I think as Americans in general, we hold too tightly to the American dream. Look at verse 23. Paul says, "But now with no further place for me in these regions, and since I have had for many years a longing to come to you whenever I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in passing," watch this, "and to be helped on my way there by you." Did you catch that? Paul is expecting, hoping, anticipating that the Romans are going to contribute financially to his trip to Spain. I don't know if you realize it, Romans is a missionary fundraising letter. That's what Romans is. I mean, and think about this, and this is a whole other sermon, but I'm just going to call this to your attention. Paul spent 15 chapters unpacking the theology of the gospel and the practical implications of the gospel to ask for missionary support. Why? Let me tell you why. Because solid churches don't just support anybody. That's why. Listen, we send and we support men and women who are going with the true gospel. We're not interested in sending people out to talk about a higher power. There's plenty of groups that can do that. We're not interested in sending people out to talk about social justice or to tell you how there's 7 ways you can be a better you. No. If you want the support of Cornerstone Community Church, we got to know what you believe about what makes a man right with God. What are you going to preach when you go? Now, notice this. Just because the believers in Rome were not called to go to Spain, Paul was called to go to Spain. The believers in Rome were not called to go to Spain, but that doesn't mean that they were not still responsible for the unreached. Because here's what I mean by that. Paul, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, has written to Rome and then to you and I about underwriting the sending of missionaries to the unreached. See, we're not free to pick and choose which part of Acts 1:8 we'll take. It's not a cafeteria-style Great Commission. Like Iowa would be our Jerusalem, right? The Midwest would be our Judea. California would be Samaria. Malawi is the ends of the earth, right? And so you're like, I tell you what, I'll take Iowa. And we'll let somebody else do California. Hey, weird out there, right? I tell you what, we'll take Jerusalem, we'll take Iowa, we'll let Charlie and Tracy handle the ends of the earth. That's not the way it is. All of the disciples were charged with all 4 regions: Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth, Acts 1:8. Now listen, while some are called to go and live with the unreached, some are not. The responsibility to reach all nations is given to every believer. Write this down. Our call as believers to generous living should be shared universally, not owned sporadically. And when it comes to reaching the unreached, every believer should either be the sender or the sent. You catch that? You and I, we ought to be the sender or the sent. And I want to tell you guys unashamedly, when you put money in that drop box, we used to pass baskets. We're not right now. COVID-19, thank you. When you put money in the box, or when you hit submit on your app, or when you mail your check in, 12.5 cents on every dollar is given to the mission team. And our mission team meets up here every month, at least once a month, to talk about how can we leverage that 12.5 cents to engaging this faith family in the mission of God to reach every nation with the gospel. You say, Pastor, who is the mission team? It's any one of us in this room, in this church family, who will give 2 hours of our month to that conversation in that kitchen or wherever we meet in this building. We're the mission team. Now, look at verse 25. But now I am going to Jerusalem serving the saints. Okay, let me try to help you understand the significance of that sentence. Let's put this into American city terms and maybe it'll help you. Let's say I'm writing a letter to the church in Las Vegas. And I'm writing a letter to the church in Las Vegas, and I'm saying, guys, I long to come to you. I've never been to Las Vegas, and that's true for me. I've never been, but I long to come to you on my way to California. I feel called to reach those unreached liberals in California. And as I come through Las Vegas, I'm going to see you for a little while, and I'm hoping that you will help me as I go to California. But before I come, I've got to swing through Atlanta. All right, now I know y'all don't get out much, but you don't really swing through Atlanta on the way to Las Vegas. Some of y'all never even been to Albia, but no, I'm kidding. Let me show you a map here. Okay, Paul. Oh, I just hit some button. There it is. Did I do that? All right, I hit the wrong button and something popped up right there, and I don't even know how that happened. Here is Corinth, right west of Athens. Do you see that? Paul is in Corinth, and he's writing a letter to Christians in Rome right there. And he says, Christians, I can't wait to come to you. I've longed to come to you. But I've had all these unreached people all the way through here that I've been prevented to coming to you because I was reaching the unreached. But now there's a foundation laid all the way through here. So I'm coming to you in Rome on my way to Spain because there's unreached people over there. But before I come to you in Rome, I need to swing through where? Jerusalem. Yeah. Jerusalem is 1,000 miles in the wrong direction. Now, I look at that and I'm thinking, wow. This is a 2,000-mile journey, round trip, in the wrong direction. Paul, by the way, doesn't realize it, but when he gets there, what's going to happen to him? Do you know? He's going to be arrested. And it's going to sideline him for months. He's going to finally get to go to Rome as a prisoner. As a prisoner. So I wrote this down. Our call as believers to generous living is to be obedient, not expedient. The word expedient in the dictionary says characterized by concern for what is opportune, especially governed by self-interest. All right, here's a question for you. You're at Hy-Vee, and one line is 4 buggies deep. You know what a buggy is? One line is 4 buggies deep, and they're all full. The other line is a half a buggy. Would you stand in the 4 buggy deep line because your person of peace is the cashier? Would you drive across town and spend more for your commodity because your person of peace works at that store? Americans as a whole, we are consumed with expedience and very much unconcerned with obedience. Look at verse 26. For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. Now the saints, the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, were very poor for a number of reasons. There was a famine in the late 40s, mid to late 40s. Josephus talked about it. It's written about in Acts chapter 11. Not only was there a famine, but Jerusalem was this place where Jews would come for festivals several times a year, and they would hear the gospel, and they would be born again, and they wouldn't leave. Like Cousin Eddie. They wouldn't ever leave, right? And so it became very overpopulated. Not to mention the persecution from the Jews toward the Christians. So there was a lot of poverty among the church in Jerusalem. And these Macedonians and Achaeans, this is modern day Greece, when Paul went through there, they gave money for those. These are Gentile believers giving money for these Jewish believers in Jerusalem. And look at verse 27. Yes, they were pleased to do so. And they are indebted to them. In other words, these Gentiles felt indebted to these Jews. Why would they feel that way? Because it was through the Jews that they received the oracles of God, right? Jesus came through the Jews. But here's what I notice. Their duty to serve and take care of the impoverished Jewish Christians was not endured with dread, but it was embraced with delight. And so I think we need to make a note here. Let's not take duty out of the Christian life. Hey, it is our duty to gather. It is our duty to take care of the poor. Read your Bible. It's our duty. But here's the thing. Why does that not make us dread? Here's why. We've been given new hearts. And our duty is now our delight, not our dread. I wrote this down. Our call to generous living is our delight, not our dread, as we respond to duty. Now, here's the other thing you need to know about the Macedonians. The Macedonians were also impoverished. The Macedonians had been for years under very, very strong persecution from the Romans. The Macedonian Christians. They are among the poorest of all the Gentile churches. But yet, listen to what Paul said about them in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 1. Now, brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God which has been given in the churches of Macedonia. Listen to this. That in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. Did you catch that sentence? That is an amazing sentence to me. Let me read it again. In a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality or generosity. The churches in Macedonia, objects of great persecution, impoverished, it says their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. And they are prime examples of this truth. Money and material things will never produce lasting joy. The Wall Street Journal quoted this: money is an article which may be used as a universal payment to everywhere except heaven, and a universal provider for everything except happiness. David found the origin of joy, Psalm 16:11, in your presence is the fullness of joy. And Christian giving originates in a heart full of joy. 2 Corinthians 8, verse 8, Paul says, I am not speaking this as a command, but as proving through the earnestness of others the sincerity of your love also. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though He was rich, yet for your sake He became poor, so that through His poverty we might become rich. In other words, write this down. Our call to generous living is motivated by the hope of the gospel, not the things of this world. And if you are born again, my friend, you are infinitely rich. You are a joint heir with Christ, and can I remind you, He owns it all. Verse 28, therefore, when I have finished this and have put my seal on this fruit of theirs, I will go on by way of you to Spain. In other words, Paul is determined to make a 2,000-mile detour because he feels convinced, I need to take this money collected by these Gentile Christians to Jerusalem for the sake of the unity of the church. My good friend Don Hunt called me a few months ago and said, Paul, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got 100 full-grown hogs and I'm going to have to put them down. He said, I found a buyer in Omaha. I can get $50 a head for them there, but I found a buyer in Phoenix, Arizona. I can get $52 a head, so I'm going to spend next week driving to Phoenix. I said, Don, you going to drive a whole extra week for $2 a head? He said, Paul, what's time to a hog? No, I made that up. But here's the big idea. A transformed life has a new perspective toward time and money. A new perspective toward time and money. You see, this money, and you can read about this in 2 Corinthians 9, Paul says this money that I've collected from Gentile Christians, this money is going to be the proof to these Jewish Christians that the gospel has transformed the lives of these Gentiles. And I thought about this. A life-changing gospel that is preached but never modeled makes one wonder if it's really life-changing. But Paul had this spiritual sense that it was a kingdom priority that he take a 2,000-mile detour. Look at verse 29. I know that when I come to you, I will come in the fullness of the blessing of Christ. How can Paul say that? Paul, how can you say that? What if they put you in prison? What if you go to Rome as a prisoner? Paul says that won't change anything. I know that when I come, I will come in the fullness of the blessing of Christ. I've thought about this text about what we do with our time and our money, and it made me think about my wallet. When you get so old, you have to put it in your front pocket because you can't sit on it anymore. But anyway, this is my little wallet, and my daddy taught me something. My daddy taught me to always keep a tuck-away dollar. And so I have usually, not always, but usually I have a $100 bill folded up like this, and it's tucked. Now look, don't y'all come trying to beat me up. I ain't sure I should have told that. But anyway, I keep it tucked down in there, and I've thought about this tuck-away dollar all week. And I thought about what you could do with $100. I thought about how many Bibles you can buy with $100. You can buy at least 30 to 40 Bibles in languages where people don't have Bibles with $100. I just bought a new depth finder for my boat. It was about $100. So you can do a lot of different things with $100. Now, parallel to my thought process, I thought about my friend David Nelms, with president of the Timothy Initiative. David called me a couple of months ago. He said, Paul, actually about a month ago, he said, Paul, we have a vision with the Timothy Initiative of starting a new church in every village that doesn't have a New Testament church in Nepal and India. And he said, God has given us, through our ministry, Paul's and Timothy's, they call them, all across Nepal and India, and we think it's doable. And he said, we have asked churches in central Iowa. David is an Iowan. He's planted Grace Church in Des Moines. Many of you know that church. He said, Paul, we've asked the churches in central Iowa to plant 500 churches in the next 2 years in Nepal and India. He said every church costs $300, and that $300 is used to train Paul's, Timothy's, and Titus's who will plant those churches. And he said $300 times 500 is $150,000. We're asking Iowan churches to plant 500 churches costing $150,000. So here's what I've already done. Because we know David and we trust David and his ministry, I've asked the mission team to prayerfully consider how many churches can we underwrite in the next 2 years in India and Nepal? And I've thrown out a number. I said, can we do 50? That's $15,000. Can we do 50? I'm just one little guy on the team. It's not my decision, but I've asked them to pray about it. But here's what I told Miss Brandy. I told her while I was preaching the first service. I said, honey, let's take this tuckaway dollar, and then let's see if we can put 2 more with it, and let's plant a church in India where they've never heard the gospel. So that's what we're going to do. But and that's my deal, but here's the thing, and I'm not bragging, I'm just saying that's what I want to do. But there's people, honestly, there's people even in our community in Lucas County who could spend $15,000 and plant 50 and never miss it. Those people are out there, let's just be honest. As a matter of fact, there are people out there who could plant all 500 and never miss $150,000. I thought about Patrick Mahomes. Now, I'm not putting him on the spot. Do you know how long it takes Patrick Mahomes to make $150,000? 26 hours. 26 hours. That's all it takes Patrick Mahomes to make 100. And now I'm not saying he doesn't have a hard job. I want to close with a few words from the song Peyton sang, and we'll wrap up. But Peyton sang these lyrics earlier. Lord, where would you have me go? Just across town or to a place where I don't know a soul? He paid it all. Man, that ought to make it our delight to say, God, where would you have me go? That ought to make it our delight to say, Lord, what would you have me give? I've run out of time, and I want to really be faithful to try to be done in an hour, but I'm gonna read you a clip of this week on a podcast from this book, The Insanity of Sacrifice. A modern-day example of the way the Macedonians gave out of their poverty, way beyond what they even had to give. And I'll do this on the unpreached page online this week, but would you begin to ask, God, is there something I need to do with my tuckaway dollar? God, am I missing something? Where are you calling me to go? What are you calling me to give? As Paul Robert continues to play, I'm going to close this sermon with a clip from last week's sermon. So this is our response to